time to have a look at a classic Atari ST game, one that I don't hear many people talk about today. This game was one of my favorites back in the days, Typhoon Thompson in Search for the Sea Child, developed by Dan Gorlin Productions and published by Broderbund Software in 1988. I always wondered how to pronounce Broderbund because of that odd O in the name. Apparently the name comes from the Afrikaans word broederbond, which loosely translates to association of brothers, but in order to distance themselves from a South African white supremacist group that shared the same name, they replaced the O with the Danish letter Ö. Here is a look at the box of the European release of the game, published by Dumark. A pretty cheap and boring plastic case with the instructions on the back of the cover. The game was released on a single-sided disc that runs on the 520 ST. It's worth noting that it runs fine on an STE as well. Now this is the American and French release, published by Broderbund themselves. Not sure why they only published the French release in Europe themselves and not for any other European countries. Now if I should judge a game by its cover, which to be honest I did a whole lot as a kid, I do prefer the cover art of the US and French release. The European one really looks a bit off. It looks a bit like a picture of Ron Howard trying to flee in a boat after he nicked someone's garden gnome. The gameplay in this video is captured from the European Dumark release of the game. It runs default at 60 Hz, so compared to some cracked versions of the game you might think that the music is too fast. But this is the way it's supposed to be. At least I think so anyway. So, the story is that on a remote ocean planet, a shipwrecked infant is adopted by sea sprites, who refuse to give him back to the humans. And you are Typhoon Thompson, a somewhat reluctant hero that has to save the infant using his jet sled while fighting off sprites that's trying to stop you. There's also helpful local spirits that will guide you on your quest. Now, the story won't win any prizes, but that's not really what the game is about. It's all about tight and fun gameplay. The game is actually based on the Apple II game Earhart, also by Dan Gorlin Productions, published by Broderbund Software in 1986. As you start the game there is an animation showing you being helped to, shall we say, find your proper motivation to begin your quest. There's actually 3 different animations here and the game cycles through them. I absolutely loved these back in the days. The animation is brilliant. I have recorded all 3 of them here so you can enjoy them. It's quite clear that Thompson really isn't too keen on saving anyone. Maybe he doesn't like getting his feet wet? After you've had your motivation, you have a meeting with your local friendly spirits that will give you a weapon and instructions to retrieve 1 of 4 magical artifacts. The artifacts are spread out on 4 different levels, or villages, and there's also a final 5th level where you need to retrieve the infant. Now in every village there's always a central treasury dome that contains the artifact, or in the case of the last village, the infant. But you can't just barge in there guns blazing, grabbing whatever you want unfortunately. You need to kidnap a number of sea sprites and then exchange them for the artifact you are seeking. The central dome is surrounded by several islands that when shot or bumped into, release angry sprites piloting flyers. You start with 1 extra life and 3 extra jet sleds, but you can have up to 5 extra lives, and you gain extra lives and sleds from the helpful spirits at the end of each level. Should you run out of either, it's game over. The game is controlled via the mouse instead of a joystick. This may take some time getting used to, but works quite well. Given the lack of analog joysticks at the time, this was a simple and effective way to add analog controls to a game. The mouse movement controls the direction of your jet sled, and the right mouse button fires your thrusters that makes you go faster. The thrusters are also used in combination with the mouse direction to turn you around, and you can also dive underwater with the thrusters to get away from the flyers. Unfortunately, the flyers can also use this trick, so it's not a permanent way to hide. A combination of the left and right mouse buttons fires the various weapons at your disposal. However, the freeze bomb weapon needs to be fired with the space key on the keyboard, which is not really a problem since you're controlling the sled with just one hand anyway. There's a total of 7 different flyers that come after you with various attacks. Some are just annoying, while others will destroy your sled or take one of your extra lives. And one complete bastard flyer will do both. The Sapper. Oh, how I loathe that one. As you destroy a flyer, the sprite piloting it drops into the water. Now is your chance to scoop him up, but if you wait too long, the sprite will swim back to its island and jump into another flyer and get ready to come back to hassle you. Once you've captured enough sprites, it's time to head to the treasury. I love this bit, where you exchange your captured sprites for the artifact. The treasury keeper really isn't happy about what's going on. Thankfully he hasn't got a flyer of his own and will reluctantly give you what you want. I just love how Thompson sadistically kicks the bag full of sea sprites into the treasury. Once you've got the artifact, it's time to deliver it to the sea spirits. They will reward you with a new artifact to recover and a brand spanking new weapon. There's a total of 4 different weapons. A laser that destroys flyers or stun sprites, scatter bombs that, well, scatter flyers in range, sprite magnets that attract sprites in water, and freeze bombs that freezes nearby flyers for a brief moment. Once you've got your new weapon, it's on to the next, more difficult level, where there will be more flyers attacking, sprites that recover faster while in water, and the need to kidnap more sprites to get the artifact. The game certainly doesn't award random blasting. The game's creator Dan Gorlin said in an interview that the game is more like a game of blitzkrieg chess than a shooter. You need to be careful not to aggro too many flyers at the same time, or your life will become a living hell, in more ways than one. The more flyers and sprites on the screen at the same time, the slower the game runs. But it's usually not a big problem until level 4, when things start getting pretty hairy. The game isn't really that difficult initially, but once you reach level 4, things start getting pretty hectic. There you also have to kidnap what feels like a small country of sea sprites. The slowdown here can become quite a problem, and this is as far as I got back in the days, and in fact this was as far as I got now when I recorded the game. Here you really need to master all of your weapons and be very patient to be able to finally retrieve the infant. Once you finish the last level, which is level 5, the replay value comes from trying to beat your high score. The score is based on the number of tasks you complete, the number of islands won, the number of sprites captured, and the amount of time it took you to complete them. The graphics are quite simple, but looks and animates beautifully. The tiny sprites have a lot of character thanks to the lovingly crafted and super smooth animation. There's also lots of neat little details like the glittering ocean or how sprites reflect in the water. The game uses a sprite-based 3D engine where all sprites are always facing you. This works very well since practically all sprites are vertically symmetrical, so the 3D effect is maintained no matter from what angle you're viewing them. Pretty clever stuff. The various sizes of the sprites needed to create the illusion of distance are pre-stored in memory. The custom paint program used by the graphics artist David Bunnett was used to create 15 scaled-down versions of each sprite. He then touched them up manually to make them look as good as possible. The music is quite simple and doesn't really stretch the ST sound chip, but it is extremely catchy. It just burrows into my mind and keeps humming away at the back of my head. And once I stop playing the game, I soon find myself humming away at the song without even noticing it. A great tune that adds a nice arcade feel to the game. Sound effects are solid, nothing that will draw smoke from the ST sound chip, but they work very well. The flyers have different sound effects, making it easier dodging them, since you can hear them coming and also, more importantly, know which type of flyer is about to sneak up on you and make your life miserable. The game is still a lot of fun to play today, and it's quite clear that it received a lot of love and care from the people who were involved in its creation. There's lots of neat little details, and the devs never lost focus on the gameplay during the 2 years the game took to finish. But everything isn't perfect. Sometimes it's a bit hard judging the distance between you and the enemies, and aiming can also be a bit tricky. And of course the low frame rate at the higher levels can be a complete pain. But still a great game, worth checking out even today. Especially maybe if you can speed up the game in an emulator. The game was also released for the Amiga in 1990. And there was also a Commodore 64 version planned. and there's actually a screenshot of it on the back of the box of the US version. But it was never released, probably due to the dying C64 market. It's not entirely clear if the C64 version was ever finished. There's been rumours about a working version on the internet, but I haven't been able to find much info on it. Magazine reviews at the time were very favourable. ST Amiga Format wrote, "All in all, it's an excellent game that will keep you frustrated and amused for a very long time," and awarded it 86%. The One gave it 88% and wrote, "Everything about Typhoon Thompson is classy, professional, and features the fundamental principles which makes great computer games great. And is extremely playable to boot. Brilliant. It's a shame there's only 5 levels." Computer and Video Games said, "Typhoon Thompson is one of the best games I've seen recently on the ST. Beg, borrow or steal a copy now," and gave it 89%. According to Dan Gorlin, the Amiga version sold well in Europe, but not in the States, probably because the Amiga wasn't very popular over there. I don't know how well the ST version sold in Europe though, haven't been able to find any figures, but I have a feeling it deserved to do better than it actually did. The game was designed by Dan Gorlin, who also composed the music. In the 70s, Gorlin studied piano at the California Institute of the Arts, and also studied and taught African dance, music and culture. At the end of the 70s, he did artificial intelligence research at the RAND Corporation, and after 3 years of that, he all of a sudden found himself with a lot of spare time in his hands. So in early 1981, he started tinkering with an Apple II Plus that he borrowed from his grandfather. That eventually led to the game Choplifter that he sent to Broderband Software. They really liked what they saw and helped him finish the game, and it was released in May 1982 and became a big success on the Apple II and sold 9,000 copies in its first month. The game was then ported to every conceivable platform at the time. The game actually did so well that Sega bought the rights to make an arcade version of the game in 1985. Sega handled all the artwork and design themselves, but Gorlin's name is still in the credits. This might very well be the first of very few home system games that were ported to the arcades. Gorlin had initially intended Choplifter to be a 3D game, but due to the limitations of the Apple II, that wasn't possible. After Choplifter was released, he continued to experiment with 3D on the Apple II using raster techniques. That led to the game Earhart, released in 1986. His next game was Typhoon Thompson, which was actually based on Earhart. With Typhoon Thompson, he was allowed to take the 3D experimentation a step further, thanks to the more advanced 16-bit systems. Ever since, Gorlin has worked on and off in the games industry, working on such games as Prince of Persia, Star Wars X-Wing Alliance, Choplifter HD and others. Currently he is self-employed and is still involved in teaching African dance and music. The Atari ST version was coded mostly by Dan Gorlin. The game was developed on a far ahead of its time custom development system based on Sun 350 workstations. This system was developed in-house by Dan, Christopher Scott, Dane Bigham and Patrick McCarty, and Typhoon Thompson was actually the test case for the system. Christopher Scott was responsible for developing the system's cross-debugger. He also wrote a cross-paint program so that the artist could design the graphics on a Sun workstation, while simultaneously seeing them on the target machine screen. Christopher was also responsible for coding the sound engine and creating the sound effects. Christopher graduated from University of California, Berkeley in 1985, where he got a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. He then started working at a company called Dynamical Systems in September 1985, where he worked on a Windows-like operating system for PC called Mondrian. In May 1986 he started working for Dan Gorlin Productions, and got involved with what is his first and so far last game project, Typhoon Thompson. He's currently working with mobile apps development and kinetic sculpting amongst other things. Scott is also running 2 of his own companies, LED Labs and Catwalk Studios. If you want to check out his LED art, head over to ledlabs.co. I will put a link in the description. Dane Bigham worked on the cross-platform development toolset that was responsible for delivery of code and content between the different platforms on which the game was being developed. Dane started working professionally with games development already during college. In 1982 he started working at Broderbund Software, where he co-designed and programmed the first Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego. He also worked on the conversions of Choplifter and Loadrunner for the Commodore 64. In 1985 he started working at Dan Gorlin Productions, where he worked until 1987. Here he was responsible for the copy protection of Earhart and the development tools for Typhoon Thompson. This included the trial-by-fire task of writing a device driver in the Sun Unix kernel for the SCSI interface between the host development stations and the target computers, such as the Apple II, Apple IIGS, Atari 5200 and Amiga 1000. In 1987 he co-founded Presage Software Development, where he worked up until 1997, when he quit the gaming industry and started working for Fortis Systems. These days, Dane enjoys client engagements at work, playing ice hockey and riding his mountain bike, and of course raising 2 teenage boys at home. Patrick McCarty was also working on the in-house tools for the development system. He was also the system administrator for the Sun computers. Patrick graduated from California State University, Chico in 1986, where he studied computer science. He started working at Dan Gorlin Productions the same year, where he was involved with Typhoon Thompson. In 1990 he started working at the Software Toolworks, and in 1994 he was hired by LucasArts Entertainment Company, where he worked on Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. He also held positions at the 3DO Company, Crystal Dynamics, Maxis EA and others. He is currently working at Hangar 13, where he worked as a senior engineer on Mafia 3. The amazingly animated graphics were created by David Bunnett. He received his art training at Brandeis University near Boston. After graduation he started working as an artist and designer. In 1980 he worked on the film Dragon Slayer, where he was credited for the film's graphics and was also responsible for creating early concept art for the dragon, together with a small-scale clay model of it that was used when creating the final dragon design. His career in the games industry began in 1986 at Dan Gorlin Productions, where he was credited for the additional artwork and story design for the game that Typhoon Thompson was based on, Earhart. He then proceeded to do the art and animation for Typhoon Thompson. In 1988 he co-founded Beyond Software, which later became Stormfront Studios. At Beyond he, amongst other things, designed the graphics for Neverwinter Nights, released in 1991. It was the first online role-playing game to have graphics and not just text. He worked at Beyond Stormfront until 2001, when he, as far as I can tell, quit the gaming industry and started focusing on other things. His last game was Bloodwake for the Xbox, where he was the project director. Sadly, David Bunnett passed away on October 13, 2013, at the age of 65. And before we end the video, I would just like to send out a couple of thank yous. A huge thank you goes to Christopher Scott for very patiently replying to my questions and helping me out. Also a big thank you to Dan Gorlin and Dane Bigham for doing the same. Thanks guys for being patient with me and very kindly replying to my questions. And of course also providing me with photos of yourself. Thanks. And of course a big thank you must also go to, and I'm sorry if I am completely butchering the pronunciation of your name, Jashmi, for allowing me to use his awesome chiptune music in this video. Don't forget to head over to his webpage and check out his other chiptunes. There's a ton of great music there made on all kinds of different systems. And with that, I'm going to say thanks for watching, hope you enjoy the video, and hope to see you in the next one. Cheers!